A very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today, our show bringing you all the latest news and events happening in the African continent. My name is Angie Meher and I'm joining you for today's edition. We begin straight away with a look at the news making the headlines, where the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries running in the Qatari capital from the 6th till the 9th of March is being held. And speaking before the event, the Egyptian delegation said Africa is facing many developmental challenges related to food security, primarily due to the geopolitical crisis facing Eastern Europe. We have more details in this report.
Heads of state and officials from different nations met in Doha on Sunday for the opening of the 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries. The conference opened with remarks from the president of the conference, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of Qatar, in which he criticized delays of humanitarian aid to Syria following the devastating earthquake. Climate change and its effects on least developed countries was one of the main topics discussed during the opening. Addressing the conference, the Egyptian delegation said Africa faces development challenges due to the European conflict. Rania Al-Mashad said Africa, which comprises 71% of the world's least developed countries, faces many development challenges related to food security, primarily due to the geopolitical crisis facing Eastern Europe. She said many countries are unable to achieve self-sufficiency in basic goods and balanced supply chains as a result of the conflict. The conference is expected to announce initiatives that will help address the challenges of the least developed states.
For more news, Cairo said it plans to increase Egyptian exports to Africa to up to $15 billion. The Ministry of Trade and Industry said the plan is to train Egyptian exporters on how to deal with the African markets, identify markets' needs, and increase exporters' access to African markets. The details.
Cairo said it plans to increase Egypt's exports to Africa to reach up to $15 billion in upcoming years by training Egyptian exporters on how to deal with the African markets, identifying the market's needs, and increasing the exporters' access to African markets. Despite their great potential, Egyptian exporters say they are faced with a lot of challenges when expanding to African markets, like the absence of banks providing credit facilities and long shipment period for goods, which can reach up to 4 months. Analysts say that as a result, Egypt has established 6 logistics centers out of 12 in 6 African countries: Kenya, Morocco, Mauritius, Nigeria, Zambia, and Algeria, to facilitate access to African markets. The Ministry of Trade and Industry said it will take full advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, AfCFTA, such as the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA agreement, to increase Egyptian exports to different African markets. Members of COMESA include Burundi, Comoros, Congo, Djibouti, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Libya, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Rwanda, Seychelles, Sudan, Swaziland, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Cairo said it aims to increase overall exports in 2023.
Still with our news segment, hundreds of students flew home from Tunisia fearful of a wave of attacks and evictions following President saying a criminal plot was underway to change Tunisia's demographic makeup. We have the details.
Almost 300 people returned from Tunisia to Mali and Ivory Coast earlier in the week after boarding repatriation flights, fearful of a wave of violence since the president of Tunisia launched a tirade against migrants. Last month, President Kais Saied ordered officials to take urgent measures to tackle irregular immigration. He said there was a criminal plot by them underway to change Tunisia's demographic makeup. Said claimed the migrants were behind most crime in the North African country, fueling a spate of sackings, evictions, and attacks. The African Union expressed deep shock and concern at his remarks, while governments in sub-Saharan Africa scrambled to bring home hundreds of frightened nationals who flocked to their embassies for help. According to official figures, there are around 21,000 undocumented migrants from other parts of Africa in Tunisia, a country of around 12 million people.
We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Hussein Hariri, former Assistant Foreign Minister. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon, madam.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us this afternoon. And let me start by asking you about the United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries. How do you expect such a conference to serve, the needs of this specific bracket at such a global economic crisis, in your opinion, sir?
Well, this is a very serious problem, whether financially, economically, or politically. And so far, the international community, despite the fact that it has recognized the seriousness of the problem, but so far there are no long-term solutions to solve the question of the high indebtedness of the least developing countries, who have suffered from the fallout of the war going on in Ukraine.
Yes.
And that problem was compounded, or has been compounded, by the increase in the interest rates by the American Federal Reserve and European banks. Because with the increase in the interest rates, the borrowing costs have risen, and of course these developing countries are in a very difficult situation. They cannot borrow, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, they have difficulty in meeting the interests, the payment of their interest and the principals. So, of course, let's hope that this conference this time around would come up with really long-term and constructive, effective solutions that would help these countries to overcome the financial crunch that they are facing right now.
Indeed, Your Excellency, now given Africa's great potential to become the world's food basket, why do you see that it's the continent that is the most affected by issues of food insecurity, sir?
Well, Africa, the number of countries, the number of African countries which are considered the least developing countries, the number is 33.
Right.
33 African countries out of 54 member countries in the African Union are considered the least developing countries. And of course, they are not in a position to meet their obligations. And of course, they are called upon to pay higher prices for their food inputs and their energy and their needs in energy. So, of course, the problems of the least developing countries are very serious, are very critical, as I said earlier, in terms of the political, economic, and financial, and even on the security level and the political stability of the political regimes in these developing countries.
Indeed. Your Excellency, now, how do you read the statement by the Egyptian delegation to the UN conference that said developmental challenges in Africa are being affected by the European conflict, and what steps, in your opinion, are needed in the coming few months or so for African countries to achieve some self-sufficiency, especially with regards to basic goods?
Well, I guess I don't want to sound pessimistic, but really it's a very serious problem facing the African continent. And of course, the African Union, in cooperation with international financial and economic institutions, hopefully would come up with solutions that would not solve completely, but would alleviate the consequences of the war in Ukraine on Africa.
Absolutely right. Your Excellency, Ambassador Hussein Haridi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, I'd like to thank you very, very much, sir, for your time and for your insight and for joining us on today's edition of Africa Today. That's all the time we have for today. My name is Angie Meher. Many thanks for joining us.